So we're going to continue to look at different strategies to help us um, multiply decimals. And today really is going to be about helping to determine where to place the decimal. So your learning target for today is I can determine where to place the decimal point in a product by using number sense and place value patterns. So we're going to be using some of the skills that we've already learned this unit. We're going to be looking at using estimation. We are going to be using some place value patterns to help us determine where they are. So we're not actually going to be doing any multiplication today. So I'm not going to be using partial product strategy, or I'm not going to be using the properties of number strategies. I'm just going to be using number sense and my patterns of place value that we've worked on this unit so far. And so if we take a look at your solve and share at the beginning of lesson 4-8, this is where I'm going to start with the explanation. So it says 3 students in Ms. Cho's class wrote the following problems on the board. The correct digits in the products are given, but the decimal point isn't placed yet. Where should the decimal point go in each product? So one of the ways that you can do to figure this out is we're actually going to go ahead and I'm going to use estimation to help figure that out. So I have 7 and 85 hundredths multiplied by 12 and 56 hundredths. 85 hundredths multiplied by 16 to get a product of 1256. So we're going to see what we get when we do that. So if I take a look at this and if I go ahead and do my estimation, 785 is going to round to 8. And then I'm going to do times 16. So I'm going to use more compatible numbers this time around than I am going to be using rounding because I want to get as close of an answer as I can using what I know. So I'm going to do 16 times 8 and see what I get. So 8 times 6 is going to be 48. I'm going to regroup my 4. 8 times 1 is going to be 8 plus 4 is going to be 128. So my answer needs to be around 128. So that means my decimal is going to go between the 5 and the 6. And when I put my decimal there, I have an answer that's near 128. So I'm using that number sense. If my estimate's near 128, then my final answer needs to be near 128. Okay? We take a look at this value. We have 98 hundredths multiplied by 5 tenths. So one of the things that we need to look at is I'm not going to use estimation this time. This time it's going to be straight number sense. So when I look at this value, we know what this value is. This value is a half. And so when I look at 98 hundredths, multiply that by a half, I'm looking at what is going to be around half of 98. Well, 49 would be too big. 4 and 9 tenths is way larger than 98 hundredths. So my answer for this problem is going to be 0.49. And so again, I just use my number sense. I use what I know about half. Half means I'm taking this value and I'm dividing it near 2. If you want to look at it in terms of using estimation, 98 hundredths is going to be near a whole. So 1 whole times 0.5 or half of a whole is going to be 50 hundredths. Well, 49 hundredths is really close to 5 tenths or a half. So that's how I arrived at that answer for the 49 hundredths. Okay, then I have 1 and 6 tenths multiplied by 1 and 5 tenths. So again, if I use some estimation and some rounding, I'm going to have 1.5 times 1. So my estimation there is going to be around 1.5, which means the best place to put my decimal is going to be between the 1 and the 5. So my answer here is going to be 1 and 59 hundredths. I place it between the 1 and the 5 because that's near my estimate. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a peek. So this is an important piece of information for you to know. If both factors are less than 1, what do you know about their product? So let's come back up here and let's take a look at problem number 2. So problem number 2 was the only one that had both factors that were less than 1. 98 hundredths was less than 1, 5 tenths was less than 1, and I said the best place to put the decimal is going to be in front of the 4 and the 9. So the generalization that we can make is that when both factors are less than 1, my product is going to be less than 1. So if both factors, this is an important thing for you to help with your number sense, are going to be less than 1, my product is going to be less than 1. So because 98 hundredths and 5 tenths was less, both factors were less than 1, my product is going to be less than 1. So again, that's something that can help us when we are determining our answers, that if I have two values less than 1, then I'm going to have an answer that's going to be less than 1. The size of the factors is going to influence the size of the product. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next page and see what other information can help us with number sense. So it says you've learned how to estimate, right? We've already talked about the estimation skill being very important when we look at using number sense. So we're going to continue to do that. So the estimation is going to be a good strategy when determining how to use number sense. So if I have 49 and 20 hundredths and I multiply that by 55 hundredths, I'm going to get an answer of 2706. I need to look at where I'm going to place the decimals. Okay. So we said if I estimate this, 49 is going to be near 50. Okay. So 49 is going to be near 50. And 55 hundredths, well, I'm going to leave that pretty relative to where it's at. It's near a half. So half of 50, when I use my estimation, half of 50 is going to be 25. So the place where I'm going to put my decimal is going to be between the 7 and the 6 because 27 is near my estimate of 25. Okay. Now, I mentioned on the previous page that when both factors are less than 1, then the product is going to be less than 1. There's another thing that you need to think about here. So it's this box B where it says multiplying a number by a decimal less than 1 gives the product less than the other factor. So let's talk about what this means. So 55 hundredths is less than 1. And so when I multiplied 49 and 20 hundredths by 55 hundredths, I got 27 and 6 hundredths. So because 55 hundredths was less than 1, 27 and 6 tenths is going to be less than 49 and 20 hundredths. So when I have one factor that's less than 1, my product is going to be less than the other factor. Okay, so let me say that again. When I have a factor, in this case it's 55 hundredths, that is less than 1, my product, or 27 and 6 hundredths, is going to be less than the other factor. So both factors are less than 1. The product is going to be less than 1. When I have one factor that's less than 1, the product is going to be less than the other factor. Okay. All right. So we have our next one. So using number sense to talk about this. So if I have 6 and 2 tenths multiplied by 5 and 1 tenths, it's going to be 31 and 62, or 3162. And then here's my decimal. So again, I'm going to use estimation where I can. I'm going to use what I know. So I'm going to do 5 times 6 because both of those would round to whole numbers. I get 30. Well, 3162, in order to make that number near 30, the decimal is going to go between the 1 and the 6. And by doing that, that's near my estimation. It's a reasonable answer. It doesn't, right here, this little bubble is important. This makes sense because 6 times 5 is equal to 30. So my answer needs to be near 30. So 31 and 62 hundredths is going to be the best answer for those two factors. All right. So on this one, on your convince me, let's take a look. It says the decimal point is missing in an answer for each of these problems. Use number sense to decide where the decimal point should be placed. Explain your thinking. So let's go through and let's talk about it. So here I have 57 or 54 and 7 tenths multiplied by 53 hundredths. So both factors, oh, this is important, both factors are not greater than 1. 53 hundredths is going to be less than 1. And we said that when I have a factor that's less than 1, my product is going to be less than the other factor. Okay, so even without estimating, I know that my answer should not be greater than 54 7/10. So that means the decimal cannot go between the two nines, because 289 is greater than 54 7/10. It can't go between the 9 and the 1, because that's going to make that greater. So now I'm going to use my number sense to help me with this. So I'm going to take 54 and I'm going to round that to 50. And then 53 hundredths, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to round that to my benchmark number of 5/10 or a half. And then half of 50 is going to be 25. So my decimal needs to go between 8 and 9, because 53 hundredths is close to a half. So my answer needs to be half of 54 7/10. So right there, I explained my thinking of how I found my answer. Because 53 hundredths is a little bit more than half, I used estimation. 50 times a half, I got 25. My answer needs to be near 25, which is how I get 28 and 991 thousandths. This problem is a little bit different, because both values or both factors are going to be greater than 1. So my product needs to be greater than this 54 7/10. So again, I'm going to use my estimation, and I'm going to show you it's going to look a little different. So I'm going to write it in blue to show you. So I'm going to do 50. That's going to stay the same, because it's a nice easy number to multiply by. And then I'm going to do 5. So when I do 50 times 5, I'm going to get 250. So my answer needs to be near 250. So the best place to put that is going to be between the two nines, because I get 289, which is near 250. My answer is reasonable. I moved on to the guided practice. So we're going to describe the unknown factors. So we're going to look different. We're going to do the opposite this time. So if 5 times 1 is going to be about 300, I need to use what I know about these two numbers. So in order to get this, I'm going to say, okay, so if I have 300, I'm going to do 300. I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to do 300 divided by 5. And when I do 300 divided by 5, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, okay, I'm just going to look at the first two values. So when I look at the first two values, that's a value that I know. So I'm going to use that multiple of 10 rule. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to take you away for a second. So when I look at 30 and I do 30 divided by 5, well, I know what that's going to be. That's going to be 6. And then that multiple of 10 rule says that 0 that I took off, well, I have to do something with it. I can't just ignore it. So I'm going to put it back on. So the factor that is going to be there is going to be 60, because 60 times 5 is going to equal 300. So the factor is going to be near 60. So near 60 is going to be my answer. Okay. Number 2. Janelle wrote 23 4/10 for the product of 7 8/10 multiplied by 3/10. Use number sense to decide if Janelle placed the decimal point in the correct place in the product. If incorrect, then give the correct product. So again, taking a look at what I have before I do any multiplication, which I'm not really doing, I'm just using estimation. I have a factor greater than 1 and I have a factor less than 1. And we said that if I have a factor that's going to be less than 1, my product needs to be less than that other factor. That's not the case here. 23 4/10 is way larger than 7 8/10. So she is not correct. Okay, so she's incorrect. The best place to put the decimal is going to be near 2 and 3, 4. And by putting the decimal between the 2 and the 3, that tells me that I am less than. So it makes sense now. I'm using that number sense. 7 eighths times 3/10, because 3/10 is smaller. My product needs to be smaller than 7 8/10. This makes that true. This video to look at problems 3, 4,